Hello, this is Shmuel Moshe, and you are listening to the Weekly Parashahcast, a weekly Torah portion podcast where I will read the text and give my own personal interpretation of what it all means. This week's portion is Vayeishev, covering the events starting with Genesis chapter 37 through chapter 40, verse 23. As always, I'd like to remind everyone that I am not a professional Torah scholar. I'm just somebody who wanted to study Torah. Let's get right into it. As always, you can follow along with the text at Chabad.org. Let's begin. Genesis chapter 37. First portion of Vayeishev. Jacob dwelt in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. When Joseph was 17 years old, being a shepherd, he was with his brothers with the flocks, and he was a lad, and was with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought evil tales about them to their father. And Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons, because he was a son of his old age, and he made him a fine woolen coat. And his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, so they hated him, and they could not speak with him peacefully. And Joseph dreamed a dream and told his brothers, and they continued to hate him. And he said to them, "Listen now to this dream which I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the midst of the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright, and behold, your sheaves encircled it, and prostrated themselves to my sheaf. So his brothers said to him, Will you reign over us, or will you govern us? And they continued further to hate him on account of his dreams, and on account of his words. And he again dreamed another dream, and he related it to his brothers, and he said, Behold, I have dreamed another dream, and behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were prostrating themselves to me. And he told it to his father and to his brothers. And his father rebuked him and said to him, What is this dream that you have dreamed? Will we come, I, your mother, and your brothers, to prostrate ourselves to you on the ground? So his brothers envied him, but his father awaited the matter. Thus concludes the first portion. So already we learn about Joseph, the favorite child, and we've seen this come up already in previous portions, but now we have it, the firstborn of Rachel, Jacob's favorite son. And he does not make that fact unknown. Everybody's aware of it. He's clearly the favorite. And this causes a lot of frustration for the brothers. They already dislike him for this. And it only gets worse because he also does not refrain from telling on them to his fathers, right? He brings evil tales of his brothers. And lastly, the dreams. He has these dreams which he doesn't keep to himself. And in these dreams, he basically says all his brothers and eventually even his parents are going to be bowing before him. And so this pisses everybody off in basic terms, right? They don't like it, they don't want to hear about it, and they don't want to deal with him. So it is already showing to be a problem that's only going to get worse in time. Now with that, we're also going to acknowledge that he had this special coat that was made for him, and it will come up again later, so keep that in mind. It's basically his special garment that only he got. Let's go ahead and move on with one last note. The brothers immediately got mad, but his father awaited the matter. His brothers envied him, but his father awaited the matter. So in other words, he didn't take it right away as what it is. He waited to find out exactly what it really meant another time. Now we can go ahead and jump on to the next portion. Genesis chapter 37, verse 12. And his brothers went to pasture their father's flocks in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, Are your brothers not pasturing in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them. And he said to him, Here I am. So he said to him, Go now and see to your brother's welfare and the welfare of the flocks, and bring me back word. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. Then a man found him, and behold, he was straying in the field. And the man asked him, saying, What are you looking for? And he said, I am looking for my brothers. Tell me now, where are they pasturing? And the man said, They have traveled away from here. For I overheard them say, Let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers, and he found them in Dothan. And they saw him from afar, and when he had not yet drawn near to them, they plotted against him to put him to death. So they said to one another, Behold, that dreamer is coming. So now, let us kill him, and we will cast him into one of the pits, and we will say a wild beast devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. But Reuben heard, and he saved him from their hands. And he said, Let us not deal him a deadly blow. And Reuben said to them, Do not shed blood. Cast him into this pit which is in the desert, but do not lay a hand upon him, in order to save him from their hands, to return him to his father. And so, here we have the first of the notes here. The brothers went to go pasture, and Israel wants to get Joseph to go and fetch his brothers, or at least find out how they're doing more specifically, and just go give me a report, right? So already that's kind of curious that all the other brothers are out there doing this work, and Joseph isn't. So does that mean he has special treatment? I think that's probably another symptom of that. In any case, he sends him, and he goes looking, and they're not where they were supposed to be. They're instead over in Dothan, so he finds out. That's where he's going to go. That's where he goes. They see him coming, and they immediately start conspiring like, well, this is our chance. We can get rid of him here and now. Great. So Reuben overhears all this, and he's like, you know what? Let's not kill him. Let's not shed that blood, because that would obviously be wrong. So instead, what we should do is just push him into the pit and leave him there. So he essentially saves his brother's life. And, this is one of those moments where we can see Reuben kind of stands out from the crowd, that he does the right thing as the eldest brother, which is looking out for his younger brother and stopping his other brothers from sinning in such a grave way as shedding blood, because this is one of the gravest sins that can be committed. So he convinces them, we're not going to do that. And it seems to be the right move. Going ahead to move on to the next portion. Chapter 37, verse 23. Third portion. Now it came to pass when Joseph came to his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his shirt, of the fine woolen coat which was upon him, and they took him and cast him into the pit. Now the pit was empty, there was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal, and they lifted their eyes and saw, and behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead, and their camels were carrying spices, balm, and lotus, going to take it down to Egypt. And Judah said to his brothers, What is the gain if we slay our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, but our hand shall not be upon him, for he is our brother, our flesh. And his brothers hearkened. Then Midianite men, merchants, passed by, and they pulled and lifted Joseph from the pit. And they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 silver pieces, and they brought Joseph to Egypt. And Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit. So he rent his garments. And he returned to his brothers and said, The boy is gone, and where will I go? And they took Joseph's coat, and they slaughtered a kid, and they dipped the coat in the blood. And they sent the fine woolen coat, and they brought it to their father. And they said, We have found this. Now recognize whether it is your son's coat or not. He recognized it, and he said, It is my son's coat. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn up. And Jacob rent his garments, and he put sackcloth on his loins, and he mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to console him, but he refused to be consoled, for he said, Because I will descend on account of my son as a mourner to the grave. And his father wept for him. And the Midianites sold him to Egypt, to Potiphar, Pharaoh's chamberlain, chief of the slaughterers. All right, so here we have it. They have made the decision. They're going to not kill this guy. They're going to actually sell him into slavery. They're going to sell him to the Ishmaelites. Great plan. So they stop, they have a meal, they're chit-chatting, and they also take his coat that was so an object of their envy and his favoritism. And Judah has this plan, if we sell him, we get a benefit out of it, right? So it's better than killing him, we get a benefit. So they all agree to the idea, but before they can come back and fetch him to sell him, someone else finds him first. Some Midianite men find him, and they take him, and they sell him for 20 silver pieces. And so he gets sold down in Egypt. Reuben comes back to go get Joseph, and he's gone. And this is basically, does this mean he came to fetch him for this purpose? Or did maybe he fetch him because he changed his mind, or he was like, this whole thing is just a bad idea. He went to go fetch his brother. It says Reuben returned, not everybody else, but Reuben specifically. So it may be that he was coming to basically put an end to this whole charade, because let's not put our brother through this. Let's not put our family through this. But, oh well, he's gone. And where will I go? Right? So that is the revelation of what place is for me when my younger brother is gone because I failed to live up to this expectation of the older brother. So what do? They create this whole charade where they'll trick Jacob and show this coat and say, oh, is this him? And he will be deceived, and he goes into an immense amount of grief, mourning for his son, who is not even really dead. Now, an interesting note that I seem to think of right now in the moment, Jacob is guilty of a previous act of deception of his father, right? Because that's what he did when he took the birthright blessing from his own brother, when he secured the blessing from Isaac, as Isaac had gone blind. And so, if anything, this level of deception almost seems like karmic justice later on down the road, that he has to go through this grief from being deceived as well. And he says, I will descend on account of my son as a mourner to the grave. So he's going to die in grief. He's not going to die in peace. He's going to die in grief. And as much as everybody tried to, they just cannot console him. He doesn't want to be consoled. This was his favorite son, and now he's gone. Likewise, the rending of the garment is a sign of the grief that is maintained even in tradition today. So it's interesting that Reuben did it, because he also probably believed it was something to that effect. Like, oh man, I've really lost my brother. He's gone. He's done for. And maybe it's the other thought, like, where will I go? Maybe the other thought was that Joseph escaped and maybe he went home, and so he'll get there first. There's no way to know for sure exactly what he was thinking, but those are a couple of options. In any case, things were not good for the boys now. They really screwed the pooch on this one, and they have to now deal with their grieving father. Meanwhile, Joseph has been sold to Potiphar, chamberlain, chief of the slaughterers in Egypt. Fourth portion, Genesis chapter 38, verse 1. Now it came about at that time that Judah was demoted by his brothers, and he turned away until he came to an Adullamite man named Hira. And there Judah saw the daughter of a merchant named Shua, and he took her and came to her. And she conceived and bore a son, and he named him And she conceived again and bore a son, and she named him Onan. Once again she bore a son, and she named him Shelah. And he, Judah, was in Chezib when she gave birth to him. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, named Tamar. Now Judah's firstborn, was evil in the eyes of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. So Judah said to Onan, Come to your brother's wife, and perform the rite of the Leveret, and raise up progeny for your brother. Now Onan knew that the progeny would not be his, and it came about, when he came to his brother's wife, he wasted his seed on the ground, in order not to give seed to his brother. Now what he did was evil in the eyes of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, Remain as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up. For he said, Lest he too die like his brothers. So Tamar went, and she remained in her father's house. Many days passed, and Shua's daughter, Judah's wife, died. And Judah was consoled, and he went up to watch over his sheep shearers, he and Hira, his Adullamite friend, to Timnah. And it was told to Tamar, saying, Behold, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she took off her widow's garb, covered her head with a veil, and covered her face, and she sat down at the crossroads that were on the way to Timnah, for she saw that Shelah had grown up, but as for her, she was not given to him for a wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot, because she covered her face. So he turned aside toward her to the road. And he said, Get ready now, I will come to you. For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, What will you give me that you should come to me? And he said, I will send a kid from the herd. And she said, Only if you give me a pledge until you send it. So he said, What is the pledge that I should give you? And she said, Your signet, your cloak, and the staff that is in your hand. So she gave them to her, and he came to her, and she conceived his likeness. Then she arose and went away, and she took off her veil, and she donned her widow's garb. And Judah sent the kid by the hand of his Adullamite friend to take the pledge from the woman's hand, but he did not find her. So he asked the people of the place, saying, Where is the harlot who was at the crossroads on the way? And they said, No harlot was here. So he returned to Judah, and he said, I have not found her. And the people of the place also said, No harlot was here. So Judah said, Let her take them for herself, lest we become a laughingstock. Behold, I sent this kid, but you did not find her. Now it came about after nearly 3 months that it was told to Judah, saying, Your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the harlot, and behold, she is pregnant from harlotry. So Judah said, Bring her out, and let her be burned. She was taken out, and she went to her father-in-law, saying, From the man to whom these belong I am pregnant. And she said, Please recognize whose signet ring, cloak, and staff are these. Then Judah recognized them, and he said, She is right. It is from me. because I did not give her to my son Shelah. But he no longer continued to be intimate with her. And it came about at the time she was giving birth, that behold, there were twins in her womb. And it came about when she gave birth, that the infant stretched out his hand. So the midwife took and bound a crimson thread on his hand, saying, This one came out first. And it came about, as he was drawing back his hand, behold, his brother emerged. And she said, With what strength you have strengthened yourself. And Judah named him Perez. Afterwards his brother emerged, the one upon whose hand was the crimson thread, and he named him Zerah. Okay, so this is a pretty heavy divergent from a tangent, if you will, from the story of what's going on with Joseph. This is about Judah. So in this fourth portion, we hear about how Judah was demoted by his brothers, and he turned away until he came to an Adulamite man. So essentially, I can only assume this is as a byproduct of what happened with Joseph. They found that Judah was just not a good guy. And the brothers, he lost his favor amongst his brothers. So he goes on and he ends up hanging out with this Adulamite fellow named Hira, and he takes a wife and then has 3 sons. Now, he takes a girl to be his son's wife, but that son happened to be evil in the eyes of the Lord, so he was put to death. So he did something wrong, and he was killed for it. Then Judah tells his second son, okay, well, your first brother did not get to have descendants, so what you're going to do is you're going to basically make sure that his wife has children, and they will be brought up under your fallen brother's house. So what that essentially means is the inheritance and things of that nature, they will go to this child who will be conceived between Onan and Tamar, but it will not be considered Onan's son, it will be considered Er's son. Now, Onan does not agree with this, so what he does is, knowing that the child won't be considered his officially, he goes and he lays with Tamar, but then he doesn't finish the job. Instead, he does not allow her to get pregnant. He basically pulls out, for lack of a better term. He pulls out and prevents her from being impregnated, instead choosing not to finish the ritual of mating proper. Right, so instead of doing what he was supposed to do, he instead spills his seed onto the ground. And this is considered to be extremely unacceptable also in the eyes of the Lord, and so he's put to death for this also. And so now there's only one son left, and he's not old enough to take this woman as a wife. She's supposed to go and wear the widow's garb so that she can be in mourning and be respected, and then when the youngest son is old enough, okay, great, then she'll get him, and it will all go as it was supposed to go, more or less. Well, what ends up happening is Judah does not stick with this plan, and as it happens, his wife dies. So he basically goes to look over his sheep shearers, and they go to Timnah, him and his buddy. And Tamar hears about this, and so she's tired of waiting. She's not going to take any more chances, so what she does is she basically goes in disguise as a whore or a harlot, and she goes and cuts him off on the road and manages to attract him. And so she's basically saying, okay, well, if I do let you have me for the night, what will I get out of it? And he's like, I'll give you a goat, basically. She'll give him some cattle, or he'll give her some cattle or something. And she says, okay, well, what guarantee do I have that you're going to give me that? Why don't you give me some collateral? And so what she ends up getting is his ring, coat, and his items to basically then use as proof of who it was that laid with her. So when he goes and he does his business, he leaves, they conceive a child, and she runs off and puts her disguise back, or takes off her disguise and goes back to wearing her mourning garb. And so now people don't realize that it was her. And a few months go by. Also, they keep it on the hush-hush, right? Judah finds out from his buddy who he sent to go complete the deal, I couldn't find her, and they're not going to go around telling people about this because we'll become a laughingstock. So let's just forget the whole thing, let's move on, and pretend nothing happened, all right? Cool. Keep it hush-hush. So what ends up occurring is 3 months later, Tamar is pregnant, and Judah calls forth for her to be burned, and she basically pulls the old switcheroo on him. Actually, it's you who screwed up. And he realizes, oh man, this is entirely because of me. Because I was supposed to give you my youngest son, and I never did. So you are not guilty of this. It's on me. But after that, he does not continue to be intimate with her. So she gets her child, but there is no further relationship between Judah and her. She gets what she was supposed to get, which is a descendant, an heir for her fallen husband, or husbands, plural, whatever you want to call it. Either way, she did what she had to do, and she got to have her children. Now, as it turns out, it was not just one, but two, a set of twins, and they were basically fighting to get out first. One of them sticks his hand out, so he gets a string on his finger. Then the other one ends up coming out first, so he's technically the firstborn, but the one with the hand was actually born first because his hand came out first. So he's Zerah, and the other one is Perez. And that concludes the tangent of this Torah portion. Now getting into portion number 5. Other than wrapping up with one last note, but obviously Judah's lifestyle is not very kosher. We could say that much, right? So, interesting. 5th portion, chapter 39 of Genesis, verse 1. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, the Pharaoh's chamberlain, chief of the slaughterers, an Egyptian man, purchased him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and whatever he, Joseph, did, the Lord made prosper in his hand. And Joseph found favor in his eyes, and he, Joseph, served him, and he, Potiphar, appointed him over his house, and all he had he gave into his hand. Now it came to pass that since he had appointed him over his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the house of the Egyptian for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was in all that he had, in the house and in the field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew nothing about what was with him except the bread that he ate. And Joseph had handsome features and a beautiful complexion. So now we learn about the fate of Joseph. It turns out he was purchased by this man Potiphar, who has a decent status, a decent role in Egypt. And as it happens, Joseph is constantly successful in just about everything he endeavors to do. So more and more responsibility is given to him, and he continues to thrive. And so for the sake of Joseph, who has favor from the Lord in his eyes, or is favored in the Lord's eyes, everything goes right, and so he keeps giving Joseph more responsibility, and more good things keep happening. So it comes to a point where, at this point now, Joseph is managing all of this guy's affairs in so much that the only thing he even knows about at this point that he has to keep track of is what bread he eats, right? So other than the meals he has at the end of the day, he doesn't know anything about what's going on inside of his personal affairs because he doesn't need to. This Joseph guy is taking care of all of it, and it's all going perfectly. And he can see that it's because he's favored by the Lord, so all according to Hashem. All right, no problem. Joseph, you're in charge, kid. Keep it up. Keep up the good work. I'm going to go do whatever I got to do. So that's more or less it in a nutshell. One last note is he is handsome and has a beautiful complexion. This will be relevant in just a few moments. 6th portion, chapter 39, verse 7. Now it came to pass after these events that his master's wife lifted up her eyes to Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." But he refused. And he said to his master's wife, "Behold, with me my master knows nothing about anything in the house, and all he has given into my hand. In this house there is no one greater than I, and he has not withheld anything from me except you, insofar as you are his wife. Now how can I commit this great evil and sin against God?" Now it came about when she spoke to Joseph day in and day out that he did not obey her, to lie beside her and to be with her. And it came about on a certain day that he came to the house to do his work, and none of the people of the house were there in the house. So she grabbed him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and went outside. Now it happened when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, that she called to the people of her house, and she spoke to them, saying, "Look, he brought us a Hebrew man to mock us. He came to me to lie with me, but I called loudly. And it happened that when he heard that I had raised my voice and called out, he left his garment beside me, and he fled and he went outside. So she left his garment beside her until his master came home. And she told him the same thing, saying, "The Hebrew slave that you brought to us came to me to mock me. And it happened when I raised my voice and called out, that he left his garment beside me and fled outside. Now it came about when his master heard his wife's report that she spoke to him, saying, 'Your slave did such things to me,' that his wrath burned. So Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, the place where the king's prisoners were imprisoned. And he was there in the prison. The Lord was with Joseph, and he extended charisma to him, and he gave him favor in the eyes of the warden of the prison. So the warden of the prison delivered all the prisoners who were in the prison to Joseph's hand, and whatever they did there, he was the one who did it. The warden of the prison did not inspect anything that was in Joseph's hand, for the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made prosper." So here we find out, thus concludes the 6th portion. So the long story short for this portion is that he's doing everything right. He's a good-looking guy, and he's got now control of all of his master's affairs, and the wife of his master wants him. And he won't do it because he knows it's a great sin to commit adultery, and he will not transgress against his God, nor will he do this wrong thing to the master who has given him such faith, right? And so day in and day out, she asks, she commands it, and he says, "No, I won't do it. I'm not going to do it." One day, he gets there to do his job, and she's the only one home, and there's no one there to be a witness. This is very important. There are no witnesses there. So she throws herself at him, demands that he lay with her, and he won't do it. He runs away. And so she gets hold of his garment and basically uses that as evidence against him. And she goes and runs around claiming, "Oh, look, this Hebrew man tried to do this thing to me. Oh, how horrible. Oh, the humanity." Right? She starts playing it up. So basically, she's so bitter that he turned her down that she starts trying to get him killed or get him gotten rid of because of her dignity and her pride or whatever it is. He refused her, and she's not going to let that slide. So now she's lying and saying that he was after her. Obviously, for us, we know this is not true, but that's what happens. So the husband believes his wife entirely, and Joseph gets thrown in prison. But as it turns out, his blessings don't stop. So while he's in prison, he's favored by the warden. And the warden puts him in charge in the prison too. And the same thing happens, basically. He just gets in charge of everything. So all the stuff that's going on in the prison is through Joseph. And because the Lord is with him. So that's it in a nutshell. Everything seems to work out for the guy. Even in the worst of places, the light of the Lord continues to bless Joseph and give him everything from charisma to success. Now we move on to the final portion, the 7th portion, Genesis chapter 40, verse 1. Now it came about after these events that the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and the baker sinned against their master, against the king of Egypt. And the Pharaoh became incensed at his 2 chamberlains, at the chief cupbearer and at the chief baker. And he placed them in the prison of the house of the chief of the slaughterers into the prison, with place where Joseph was imprisoned. And the chief of the slaughterers appointed Joseph to be with them, and he served them, and they were a year in prison. Now both of them dreamed a dream, each one of his dream on the same night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison. And Joseph came to them in the morning, and he saw them, and behold, they were troubled. And he asked the Pharaoh's chamberlains, who were with him in the prison of his master's house, saying, "Why are your faces sad today?" And they said to him, "We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter for it." Joseph said to them, "Don't interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me now." So the chief cupbearer related his dream to Joseph, and he said to him, "In my dream, behold, a vine is before me, and on the vine there are 3 tendrils, and it seemed to be blossoming, and its buds came out. Then its clusters ripened into grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I placed the cup on Pharaoh's palm." And Joseph said to him, "This is its meaning. The 3 tendrils are 3 days. In another 3 days, Pharaoh will number you with the other officers, and he will restore you to your position, and you will place Pharaoh's cup into his hand according to your previous custom when you were his cupbearer. But remember me when things go well with you, and please do me a favor and mention me to Pharaoh, and you will get me out of this house. For I was stolen from the land of the Hebrews, and here too I have done nothing, for which they have put me into the dungeon." Now the chief baker saw that he had interpreted well. So he said to Joseph, "Me too, in my dream, behold, there were 3 wicker baskets on my head, and in the topmost basket were all kinds of Pharaoh's food, the work of a baker, and the birds were eating them from the top of the basket of my head." And Joseph replied and said, "This is its meaning. The 3 baskets represent 3 days. In another 3 days, Pharaoh will remove your head from you and hang you on a gallows, and the birds will eat your flesh off you. Now it came about on the 3rd day, Pharaoh's birthday, that the Pharaoh made a feast for all his servants, and he counted the chief cupbearer and the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief cupbearer to his position as cupbearer, and he placed the cup on Pharaoh's palm. And the chief baker he hanged, as Joseph had interpreted to them. But the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, and he forgot him. So we find out the specifics of what's going on inside of the prison with these 2 gentlemen. Now, as we know, Joseph is a dream interpreter. He did this with his own dreams, and now he can do this for these fellas who've been locked up. So the cupbearer and the baker both have a dream, and he offers to interpret them for them. The cupbearer gets a favorable outcome. His fortune looks great. He's going to be reinstated, taken out of jail. Everything's going to be good. The baker, not so much. He's going to be put to death. It's going to be terrible. So either way, Joseph says, remember me when you get taken out of jail and tell the Pharaoh about me so that I can get out of this place since I gave you a good dream interpretation. He doesn't remember him at all. At any rate, everything goes on according to the interpretations. Everything goes exactly as was foretold, and Joseph is stuck in the prison. The baker is put to death. The cupbearer is restored. And that concludes this week's Torah portion. So that was Vayeishev, which translates to "and he dwelt," and it of course begins with the dwelling of Jacob and stories about his son Joseph, who is now really the main character of our stories here, though a little side story about Judah as well. Interesting, the different things we hear about, but mostly, I do find it quite curious that Judah's episode is detailed in such length, considering all that goes on there. I mean, this is primarily about Joseph, yet we hear about the story of Tamar and Judah's sons. I do find that particularly interesting that it fits in here chronologically in the storyline. In any case, Joseph, it shows, is favored even in the worst of conditions. The blessing that he has, that he seems to have inherited from his father and so on, the one that basically has the Lord walking with you, that is what Joseph has going on, and it has clearly paid off. So, yeah, if you've got the Lord with you, even in the worst, darkest of dungeons, you're going to be in a pretty good situation. And that's it in a nutshell. So thank you so much for tuning in. This has been the Weekly Parashahcast with Shmuel Moshe. I hope you found this at least somewhat enlightening. I think the most challenging thing for me was to describe what happened with Judah's sons and Tamar, particularly with the hope of keeping this content to be relatively safe for all audiences. But I do think it's interesting that we don't hear exactly why is considered evil in the Lord's eyes, thus that he was put to death. And we also see wow, these things that happen are pretty extreme. Why didn't he give the last son to her? Maybe it was because he was afraid he'd die too. Who knows? Whatever the case is, definitely an interesting side story as we're going through the history of Joseph. Now here's a little side story about Judah's situation. Now back to Joseph. Definitely interesting. Also, let this be an important lesson to everybody. Do not think just because you are upstanding and you say no to somebody who wants you to do something you don't want to do, that doesn't mean they won't try to make you look like the bad guy because you rejected their advances or did not say yes to it. In this case, it was an affair, but it could also be, hey, come do this crime with us, and you say, no, I'm not going to go do that crime. So then what do? They try to frame you for the crime, that kind of thing, because you wouldn't play ball, etc. In any case, just my thoughts, my notes on everything there. I hope that is some valuable advice that you can keep with you. When you keep in mind, it's not enough just to say no. You should also make sure you protect yourself before somebody can try to take advantage of your situation. Even if you're doing the right thing, that doesn't mean you're safe. So always keep an open ear, open eye, and an open mind to the dangers that come not just from avoiding peril and avoiding misdeeds, but also avoiding the people who wanted to commit those misdeeds in the first place. Well, that's it for now. Until next time, this has been Shmuel Moshe. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Wrapping up this reading for the Shabbat of the 26th of Kislev, 5784, December 9th, 2023, this has been Shmuel Moshe. We'll see you next time. Baruch Hashem.